Thank you, Ryan, and hello, everyone. So a small PSA before I'm starting. If you want to get the resources that I'm sharing, please fill out the form at the end, and feel free to connect in LinkedIn or Twitter as well. So first of all, it's great being here in New York. Hopefully everybody are excited. We are midday and we have a really excited morning. So usually you come to a talk like that with some pre-notions. So today I want to start a bit differently. I want to start with telling you what this talk isn't about. It isn't a story about cutting costs in order to reduce headcount or to do more with the same people. It's not a story about cutting the infrastructure cost by moving to the cloud, and it's not a story about reducing the cost of your infrastructure on cloud or on GKE. Although I have plenty of resources to share with you after if you want to. It's actually a story about solving a problem, an engineering problem, from a different perspective, addressing the business need, reducing the operational cost, while increasing satisfaction and retention of your own on-callers. Imagine that, your team, your engineers, happier and have more time to spend on velocity versus frustrating tasks, all without compromising reliability and even improving customer experience. And now that hopefully I got you intrigued enough, I'm Ayelet Sachto. I'm an SRE in Google, driving reliability in GCP, and in the last 2 years, I led GKE sustainable operation efforts, reducing the cost of our operations as our fleet increased without compromising our reliability. And for today, all you need to know about me is that I've been living and bleeding for production for more than 2 decades now. And today I'll share with you learning from that program with the hope of making your own call, your monitoring and alert a bit easier. And while every company has its own challenges, I'll focus on common things from this program spanning across dozens of teams, working with Google customer teams and when I worked on smaller startups. So to warm up, let's start with a question, hopefully an easy one. Who here loves to get paid for non-actionable things? Raise of hand. Maybe in the middle of the night? Interesting, no one. What about toil? Who here loves toil? Who here knows what toil is? Okay, so by toil I mean manual, repetitive, tactical, automatable, and has no enduring values. So again, raise of hands, someone here loves toil? Still no one. So I'm sort of alluding to the motivation behind the program. As adaptation of GKE increased, there was an unmaintainable increase in our investment in operation, the engineering cost of maintaining the product. So what's the first step of solving a problem, any engineering problem? We need to start with understanding the requirements, right? So in this case, defining what is operational cost. When people think about operation, they think about machine. But instead, I want to talk to you about humans. We're referring to the operational cost, which is your engineers. To simplify, you can think about the engineering resources that are not spent on velocity work, not on development, but the cost of keeping the lights on, KTLO. And spoiler, remember that with all human resources, there are those pesky elements of satisfaction and retention, and we'll touch on those shortly as well. So after we defined it, what is next? I lost. We then need to measure it, which leads me to the first takeaway from today. You can't improve what you don't measure. Yes, even toil. Understanding your current state is essential for identifying improvement areas and driving change in your organization. And if you don't know where we stand, how can we know if improvement is needed, where, and most importantly, how we can be expected to change anything? This program wasn't the first attempt to provide a holistic approach to reduce operational investment and improve collaborations between the teams. Our organization already had some passionate investments in improving our operation, so there weren't a lot of low-hanging fruits. From a personal perspective, when I joined, I had a scoped area. But as other leaders left, I could reimagine the problem and building on the learnings from my own POC. The difference in my approach was the focus on the human element, combining technological solutions with culture and processes, understanding the narrative behind the numbers, and iterating based on learnings and early successes. Unsurprisingly, from our first takeaway, we first worked to align on the definition and improve our measurements. In the POC, I focused on one critical theme, starting with analysis using the data we already had, which was mainly machine data. But it required a lot of standardization, lots of workarounds and tweaks to understand the current status. But later, I added information from listening sessions, shadowing, and surveys. In parallel, we prioritized creating dashboards that track ticket load across GKE on-call rotations, collecting additional data and understanding the sources of ticket loads, bugs, alerts, escalation, and so on. As a result, I was able to identify problematic alerts, which I'll show you in the next slide, as well as capturing actionable suggestions and understand the metric we really care about. Those are a few examples of improving the actionability of our alerts. It might not seem a lot, but this actually represents 45% of the team quarterly load. To achieve that, we reduced the fan of alerts, used conditional alerting, and focused on top customers. And I will expand on those methods later. In the next phase, we had better measurements and dashboards. We implemented some of our first engagement learning and collaborated with 3 additional dev teams to understand their top sources of load. One of them I'll demonstrate in the next slide. Our focus again was on actionability and reducing noisy alerts. To clarify, when we're talking about unactionable, I'm not referring to automation. I'm referring to things that involved humans, but not necessarily needed to, as it can be done by changing the alert or improving processes. In past research in Google, we found that when a human is involved, we at least add 20 minutes to the incident. So as a good rule of thumb, if you can, take the human out of the equation. For example, by automation and processes. Note to the room, there's several places all over here if you want to join. Don't need to stand in the door. We also identified and tackled gaps in teams' on-call onboarding and training, and lack of standardization in responder processes, like handoffs. Who here have handoffs? Okay, a few people, great. Based on the learnings from this phase, I created initial best practices across the organizations and established a strategic plan moving forward. This is an example of one of the rotation that had a very low actionability. And yes, you are reading it correctly. We had only 6% actionable alert that actually needed an engineer to be involved. The solution was, again, taking the human out of the equation by improving our automation and improving the accuracy of our indicators, our SLIs. At the next phase, we establish a new partnership model to improve the team collaboration, which included a process of embedded engagement. Our approach was to be more methodological, sharing best practices broadly so the entire organization can benefit from it, with the goal of doing the right thing with minimal engineering time. We also expanded on learnings that addressed organizational level issues, like horizontal alerts, which you will see an example in this graph. If we want to innovate, we can't eliminate incidents, but this is an example that we can make them hurt less. The first one was before we started the program, and the second in the middle of it. In phase 3, we understood that although we set the foundation, it is important that we won't lose the momentum and go deeper and reach a high level of maturity across our organization. Given our size and the ratio between devs and SRE, we quickly needed to think about scaling ourselves and the program. As a manager, I was faced many times with the question of how do I scale my team? And as an IC, how do I scale myself? I use the same approach that worked for me in the past. I'm doing it again and again, and every time I fine-tune the process, and then create assets, processes, and systems, and enable others to use it. So from the one, it became a few, which become eventually the standard. If you're familiar with the 3, 4, and 5 of reliability, you probably know that at scale, automation is necessary, but it's not sufficient. The second takeaway is that automation alone won't solve operational challenges, as cultural change is often needed, supported by processes and systems to facilitate and enforce it. And that can be achieved with best practices, guidelines, and guardrails. So in the same way we want to eliminate on-call ambiguity for pages and outages, we also want to do the same for all on-caller responsibilities. For example, ticket handling, alerts, and escalations. And when I'm talking about cultural change, I'm talking about people. Creating and enabling culture, accept change as normal, and not really just saying that. Blameless postmortems, but also the processes that should allow for this culture, like onboarding, training, and upskilling. Systems and cultures go hand in hand. As part of the work, we identified 4 main areas that we worked on and created guidelines and guardrails like automations. The first one is alerting, and we want to be consistent and be conscious of alert fatigue. So when we add alerts, don't create new duplication and consider fan out. For example, regional versus zonal. Do consider having dependency alert. For example, if X doesn't work, alert on X, but if it does, check Y, and so on. Or consider having multiple versions for the same alert, single versus multiple versus fleet level. Do make sure that the right responders are getting the alert and they have the needed information to take action. Remember, alerts and pages need to be actionable. Make sure that the playbook has the right information for the on-caller to take action on. It should be impact, debugging steps, helpful troubleshooting, identification of the problems, and not just sharing a graph. and also step-by-step mitigation. The rule of thumb, if you are getting awake in the middle of the night with not knowing anything about the service, will you be able to solve the problem or at least mitigate the customer impact? The best practice is creating guidelines or templates of both of good alerts in your own team. In addition, have processes to review the alerts. It can be done as part of on-call shift, as part of postmortem AI, as part of operational meeting, or having proactive alerts like we did. The next two areas are actually related. We want to be data-driven, both as on-callers when we're looking at past tickets, but also at a higher level when we're looking at the ticket queue, for example, for our prioritizations and our actionability measurements. It's important to be consistent in the way that you close tickets. This is true both for the status of how we close the ticket and also when we're looking at ticket data. We want to eliminate the on-call ambiguity, again, including for ticketing handling. Because on-call shifts and ticketing processes is a session by itself, I'll focus on two. The first one is separating between triage and mitigation. This is critical for reducing the time to resolve. Think about it. Let's say that you open a ticket and after a week you get a response that it should be directed to a different team or that it's missing information. Not only that you'll be frustrated, but also you increase the time to mitigate customer impact. So at first, we want to triage the ticket. We want to evaluate, is it in the right place? Is it prioritized correctly? Is it really a P1? Maybe it's something that needs to be addressed sooner and was deprioritized. Maybe the opposite. Maybe it actually should be P2. Or maybe we see several instances of the same problem, which means that we have an outage. Does it also include all the needed information? And is it actionable? Caveat, if you have an obsolete ticket, a ticket that does not alert anymore, don't just close it. Make tomorrow better than today. Improve the alert for the next time. The second is how to hand off or close tickets. As an on-caller, I went many times to past tickets to see how it was resolved before. So capturing what was done is important not only for knowledge sharing and onboarding, but it's also for identifying repeating steps to be used in playbook and potentially automation at a later step. This is especially important when you are handing off tickets. You don't want to have duplicate work, or you want to explain your rationale and what you've done. Not only what worked, but also what didn't. So a small poll check. Who here in their own organization has incident management and postmortem training? Raise a hand. A few. The rest are winging it. And who here feel comfortable with incident management? Basically being on call and getting a page. Also a few. I'm guessing the rest are still winging it. So while the details can change, the things that you shouldn't give up on, and this is especially for the people that didn't raise their hand in the first time or raise their hand in the second time, on onboarding processes, both for standards and for culture, on-call training and on-call processes, especially incident management. You can also have wheel of misfortune. Who knows what is wheel of misfortune here? No one? Oh, a few, yeah. We want to practice our incident management. Incident management is like a skill, like a muscle that we want to practice. Wheel of misfortune let us do that. We can also do that with IRT, have DIRT exercises, disaster recovery, and also regular upscaling sessions, for example, weekly, monthly tech talks. At minimum, we want it for every new project. that the team is going to be on call for. So I mentioned that scaling needs systems and processes like guidelines and automations. But we also want to be mindful of teams. We want to be mindful of the culture. And a critical aspect of that is it's people. You can't take the human out of the equation altogether. Few of the most important learnings that I shared were not based on machine data. They collected during listening sessions, surveys, and shadowing. Numbers are telling only part of the story. And we were able to learn how to reduce time to mitigate, to identify opportunity for improvement, and identifying gaps in responders' readiness and increase confidence due to that quality data. I found that engineers weren't frustrated by doing operational tasks. They were not even frustrated by doing manual tasks that, to be honest, surprised me a lot. They were frustrated by doing repeatable tasks that didn't felt like they were value or added anything to that incident. Basically, when they felt like their work was meaningless or had no impact. Especially as it meant that they cannot work on their cool, impactful project that they were working on. So allowing them to spend less time on operations and more on velocity made them happier and increased their well-being. I'm not saying we fixed everything, but they stopped complaining and the satisfaction in the surveys increased. The solution was to empower and enable your engineer, not just by improving your alerts, but through education, processes, system, and most importantly, by giving them a voice when it's come to improving the product, which will give them a sense of ownership. So remember, on-call satisfaction isn't in conflict with reducing operational cost. The opposite, it goes hand in hand. So to summarize phase 3, scaling impact using systems and culture, we continue scaling the operational maturity requirements to additional team across all sites. We improve responder readiness by creating self-paced trainings and resources. We provided guidelines and guardrails, creating recommendation, site-level AMA sessions, office hours, and even checklists. And we continue our investment in convergence, like low actionability alert, to proactively address top sources of alert, and tackle organizational issues like horizontal alerts. Noteworthy that throughout the process, we, as many others, dealt with changes in the industry, organization reprioritization, and destaffing. And yeah, I know that I said it's all about people, but it's still a business. And we need to incentivize our engineering teams to do the right thing to actually solve the problem. Because most of the time, our engineers are not being incentivized to actually reduce the operational cost. They incentivize for innovation. And when it's come to operations, perhaps to patch the problem or provide a quick fix and not a long-term solution. And because everything is about incentives, we had to evolve one more and create a common language for leadership. I envision an actionable framework that will not only allow us to scale the standards that we created, but also incentivize senior leadership and teams to maintain by creating a health risk scoring system for each one of the teams and on-call rotations. We also incorporate that framework in the organizational strategy to continue the effort. This involves a lot of work with stakeholders and collaborations with the teams in order to identify the right domain areas and working with relevant subject experts to identify the risk indicators across the organization. But it was worth it because the framework provided a common language for leadership to know what are the risks in their own organization and what are the areas that they need to prioritize, for example, by allocating resources, engineering, headcount. And also incentivize our team to work on those specific risks. The adaptation was also multi-phased and required leadership buy-in. This had to be proved and warmly received by devs and stakeholders, and it's part of our GKE strategy for the next few years. So to summarize, if there is one thing that you take from today, is that measurement is the key to drive improvement and change. Because if we don't know where we stand, how can we know what we need to improve, how, and mostly if we actually improve that? If there are two things that you take from today, is that operations can be only solved with automation, but cultural change might be needed as well. And for that, we need processes and systems to facilitate and enforce it. Like any software engineering project, when it comes to organizational complexity, start simple and iterate, and allow flexibility to pivot and evolve with time. And lastly, reducing operational costs and people satisfaction isn't in conflict. The opposite, healthy on-call and happy engineers go hand in hand with business goals and doing more with less. So what can you do to start today? First of all, measurement. Measure everything, including toil and on-call satisfaction. Have a regular process to review alerts, proactively checking for noisy alerts. Have processes for onboarding, on-call, including ticketing and incident management. And document the way that you operate for your own team and new members, but also for teams that you are interacting with. Include scope of work, how to open bugs, working hours, and other relevant information. We have a lot of publicly available resources developed by different teams, and you can find them at sre.google. And in the short link, you can also find curated lists that I pulled up, both for practitioners, but also for leaders in their organization. And you can also find a link to my O'Reilly book of Autonomy of an Incident there. And with that, I want to thank you.